So let's take a few minutes to get a sense of how news sites are organized and what that tells you about the information that they're presenting. So right here you can see the homepage of the New York Times. Right, the New York Times is a professional journalistic outlet. It's probably the most highly regarded outlet in the United States. And if you look at their website, they first of all make a very clear distinction early on between stuff that comes from the opinion pages and stuff that's more traditional news. Now, in most traditional news sites, you'll find that their news stories, which are about what's happening and what's new in the world, are on the top left. And then this piece toward the top right over here is saying these are opinions of people. Right? If we look at one of these articles, for instance, we find they clearly identify that this is a piece by a contributing op-ed writer. Right? What that means is that this is somebody who is writing for the New York Times, but is not an employee of the New York Times, and is thus not necessarily, in fact, probably not a journalist. They tell you over here a little bit about the person, and then you can read the article. You'll notice the New York Times, online at least, does a fair amount to try to link to some of the different sources that are being used. So what you see right here is that this piece is by an op-ed writer. And so Thomas B. Edsall is not an employee of the New York Times necessarily. He is writing an opinion piece. An opinion piece is a piece that typically does have some kind of political bent to it. He's making an argument, and he's talking about reaching out to voters left behind, but may say, things that betray a partisanship or something else like that in his article. If you were to find those kinds of statements in an article that was not an opinion piece, that might be somewhat worrisome, right? You can see there are a bunch of links from here to various claims. So right here it says, we're still learning more about, one thing we're still learning more about, which seems to be a typo, is how the rural, less populated regions of the country, known among demographers as non-metropolitan counties, which already suffered from higher than average poverty rates, recovered from the recession at a far slower pace than more populous metropolitan counties. And you can see right here, there's a link to be able to go evaluate that claim. Where did that claim come from? Well, that claim came from the US Department of Agriculture, right? That's a reasonably reliable government source. It's not coming from some page you've never heard of, which is a very good sign for the kind of information that's being used, right? So there's considerable value in following the links in a news story like this and seeing where they lead. Do they lead to other high-quality sources of information, or do they lead to somewhere you've never heard of before that might make you wonder what exactly is being presented? So if you look at a more traditional news story in the New York Times, you'll see this one right here is about a US-led strike that kills 18 allies in Syria. If you click on an article like this, it's written here by Helene Cooper. We can click on it, which is nice, to see who she is. Well, Helene Cooper is the Pentagon correspondent with the New York Times, right? She joined the paper in a particular year, et cetera, et cetera. So she is a professional journalist. She works for the New York Times and covers stories for them. You can imagine that if she's the Pentagon correspondent, she goes to the Pentagon most days to understand what it is that's going on there and to be able to pass on information from the Pentagon to the New York Times. We can then look at what she writes here. You'll see that this story is written in a very different way from one, say, about an opinion. It tells you very factually what happened to start off and proceeds to put that in some degree of context. So at the beginning it says an airstrike by the American-led coalition fighting the Islamic State killed 18 Syrian fighters allied with the United States, the military said on Thursday, right? Looking at something like this, you find that it starts out with a factual claim and it works to try to unpack that factual claim in the paragraphs that follow. It tells you more information about it. There are quotes that appear in this article, and those quotes are coming from sources that presumably have expertise in this. So who are they? Well, the first quote here seems to come from Central Command, right? Central Command is, if you were to look them up, the organization responsible for Pentagon policy in the Middle East, right? And so understanding what Central Command is might be something you need to look up to understand this article fully, but being able to see that Central Command is who said that lets you evaluate the quality of that particular claim, even within the news story. You might also find that a piece of news that you encounter comes from a site you've never necessarily heard of. So let's talk about how you might evaluate a site like that when you encounter it. This site is called Evolution News and Science Today. And you can scroll through and see a series of articles that they seem to be publishing. Notable right from the beginning is that there are no advertisements whatsoever on this page. That should actually raise some questions. Why? Because advertisements are an important piece of the revenue model for most real news sites. So where is the news coming from if there's no advertisement? Who's paying for it? If you find a site that doesn't have advertisements, you're probably well served if they have an About button like this to click on it and to try to understand where that information's coming from. In this case, they tell you that Evolution News and Science Today provides original reporting and analysis about evolution, neuroscience, bioethics, intelligent design, and other science-related issues, including breaking news about scientific research. It later tells you that the articles themselves are the copyright of something called the Discovery Institute. So if you want to know what Evolution News and Science Today is doing, you're probably well served to look up the Discovery Institute. What do we find when we look up the Discovery Institute? Well, here they are, discovery.org. The Discovery Institute, actually let me jump to their mission here. The Discovery Institute, when you get to their mission page, tells you that the Institute's goal is to advance a culture of purpose, creativity, and innovation. And if you go through the various different parts of the Discovery Institute, you learn that they are actually an organization dedicated to promoting intelligent design as an alternative theory to evolution. So when we were on a site about evolution and science news, that you then find out is being supported by an organization that has as one of its goal the legitimization of a particular argument about what is and isn't science, that should make you wonder what it is that's being reported and whether it's truly objective or not. We can look at some of the particular articles that are being proposed here. So this one says evolutionist certainty comes from metaphysics, not science, right? And we find an article claiming that what's going on when you look at evolution is something that is not actually about science, but is about something else. Why would an organization like this be saying that? Well, because they're being, in part, funded to promote a particular purpose. And so you should question an article like this perhaps a little more than you might question something coming from a source that doesn't have funding that has a particular purpose. So next, let's take a look at CNN. CNN is a pretty widely followed news outlet. They are a branch off from cable news network, or the CNN that you know on cable television. And here you can see CNN is presenting a whole lot of different news stories. But there are a few things that you should notice from the bat are a little bit different about the way that CNN is presenting its news than, say, the way the New York Times does. For one up here, the title of this news article is Mother of All Bombs. The New York Times would not call a news article that, right? If you look at many of the different news things that are being presented down here, last cocaine cowboy arrested, Heidi and Spencer are going to be parents. The titles here are already much more sensational than what you perhaps saw from the New York Times. They're encouraging you to click on these stories in a way that the New York Times articles just don't present a similarly attractive headline. If you click on one of these articles, you find that actually when you get down to the reporting looks in many ways like the quality reporting that we saw before. So we start off with a relatively straightforward argument about what it is that's happened, and that is then expanded into a larger story. So it's still of the style that you might expect from a more traditional journalist. We can find the two individuals who wrote the article up here. If we look them up, if we click on Barbara Starr, for instance, we learn that she's CNN's Pentagon correspondent. Apparently today is a big Pentagon news day. Ryan Brown, in contrast, is another reporter who covers defense and the Pentagon for CNN. So these are beat reporters whose job is to cover military news. And so they're reporting on what's going on militarily by talking to people in the Pentagon. And so that is the source of their expertise on this particular issue. In addition to different kinds of actual news, many real news sites and a lot of other sources on the web have news sections that aren't truly news. So the New Yorker has a section called the Borowitz Report. What is the Borowitz Report? Well, the Borowitz Report is a fake news from the New Yorker that is designed to be satirical, to say it's as if this thing were true. So in joking about the relations between Russia and members of Donald Trump's campaign, they have the article, "Putin angrily resigns from Trump's re-election campaign." Now, obviously, Putin was not actually on Trump's re-election campaign. You can find, if you look closely, that it indeed says satire from the Borowitz Report up here at the top. And then there's something that looks like a very traditional article, but that is meant to be a joke, right? In a stunning rebuke of a former close ally, Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday angrily resigned from Donald Trump's 2020 re-election campaign. This is not meant to be real news, but often people don't pay enough attention when they see the headline or when they look at it very briefly to recognize that that's the case, right? So if you look carefully around this, you notice that it's satire from the Borowitz Report, which tells you that it is not actually meant to be taken truthfully. In a similar vein, anything that you might find from, say, The Onion would be a case of something that isn't meant to be taken as literal, even though many people pass on stories from The Onion thinking that they are in fact true. This is a case where looking a little bit more closely at what the source is, and in this case, what source within the New Yorker you're encountering, is really quite important.